The banquet hall at the Hargrove estate smelled of white roses and warm wax from 200 candles burning along the centerpiece runners. Emily Calloway, 34, stood near the east wall with a glass of sparkling water she had not touched, her dark blazer buttoned to the collar in the heat. Near the head table, inside a small velvet shadow box framed by white lilies, sat the Calloway brooch, oval, silver-toned, set with garnets their grandmother Nora had worn to every funeral and wedding for 50 years. It was the object that had split the family in two for 18 months. It was the reason Emily had driven 4 hours from Charlotte. And it was, she was almost certain, stolen. She made her rounds the way she always did at these gatherings. Brief, efficient, affectionate enough to avoid offense. Her aunt pressed both cheeks. Her uncle gripped her hand too long. The bride, her younger sister Diane, was somewhere near the dance floor in a cloud of tulle, unreachable for the moment. Emily had told herself this gathering would be different. She had told herself that every time since Nora's funeral, 18 months ago, when the probate attorney called to say the brooch was missing from the estate inventory, and every branch of the family had immediately looked at every other branch. Near the head table, someone had placed the brooch inside a small velvet-lined shadow box as part of the floral display, a gesture meant to honor the late Nora Calloway, matriarch and grandmother to half the people in the room. The brooch was oval, silver-toned, set with a cluster of garnets gone slightly dull with age. Emily had not seen it in over a year. She stepped closer. The noise of the room thinned. The garnets caught a candle flame and held it. Martin Calloway, 41, came through the main doors at 8:17 with his tie already loosened and his jaw set in the way that meant he had been rehearsing something in the car. He was Emily's first cousin on her father's side, broad-shouldered, with a habit of pulling at his left earlobe when he was about to say something he could not take back. He spotted the shadow box from across the room. He did not stop to greet anyone. He walked directly toward the head table, and the air in the room shifted before he even opened his mouth. Martin's voice cut through the string quartet like a chair scraping concrete. He pointed at the shadow box and announced, loud enough for the caterers near the kitchen door to hear, that the brooch on that table was not the brooch their grandmother had left to the family, and that someone in this room knew exactly where the real one had gone. The music stopped. Glasses were set down. Diane, still in her wedding dress, appeared at the edge of the dance floor with her bouquet hanging at her side. 63 people stared at Martin, and then one by one, they turned to look at each other. What followed was not a single argument, but 6 arguments happening simultaneously. The way a crack in old plaster becomes a web before you can get a hand to it. Names were invoked. Their uncle Raymond, who had been given access to the estate after the funeral. Their cousin Petra, who had cataloged the jewelry. Someone mentioned a lockbox. Someone else mentioned a lawyer. Emily stood at the edge of it, turning her water glass slowly in both hands, watching the faces of people she had known her entire life go hard and unfamiliar in the candlelight. She pushed through the side door and onto the stone terrace, where the October air hit her like a correction. Petra Calloway was already there, leaning against the far railing with a cigarette, the ember a small orange point in the dark. Petra was 38, the one who had cataloged Nora's jewelry after the funeral, the one whose name had just been said inside with a particular edge. She did not turn when Emily came out. She said without preamble that she had known Martin would do this tonight. Emily said she had known it too. Neither of them said what they actually meant, which was that they had both been waiting to see who would move first. Petra took a long drag and said it plainly. The brooch in the shadow box was not the one she had cataloged. She had noticed it the moment Diane set up the display that afternoon. The setting was slightly different. The prongs on the center garnet, the way the clasp sat. She was a jeweler. She had not said anything because she had wanted to see what the family would do with it. Emily asked how long she had known. Petra looked at the cigarette ember and said, "Since March, 7 months." Something cold moved through Emily that had nothing to do with the October air. 6 weeks after the funeral, A manila envelope had arrived at Emily's Charlotte apartment from the office of a probate attorney in Asheville. Inside was a single folded sheet of Nora's cream stationery, written in her looping, slightly unsteady cursive. Emily had read it once, decided it was grief talking, and placed it in the back of her desk drawer beneath a stack of utility bills. She had not looked at it since. But standing on the terrace now, with Petra's admission still hanging between them, she found she could recall the first two lines, almost word for word. Nora had written, "By the time you read this, someone will have already told you the brooch is gone. Do not believe everything you are told about what is missing." Emily had read those two sentences in April and put the letter away. She turned from Petra now and went back inside, not toward the argument, but toward her coat, which she had left on a chair near the entrance. Inside the coat's inner pocket, folded in thirds, was the note she had carried for 18 months without understanding why she had never thrown it away. The coat was a charcoal wool peacoat, and she found the note exactly where she had put it, folded inside the inner breast pocket. The cream paper soft at the creases from months of being carried and ignored. She stood in the alcove beside the coat room, under a single overhead fixture, and unfolded it. Nora's handwriting was slow and deliberate, each letter formed as if it mattered. The note was 4 sentences long. Emily read all 4 sentences twice, then stood with the paper in both hands while the noise of the reception rolled down the corridor toward her. She found Martin near the head table, still holding the shadow box, still talking at anyone who would hold eye contact. Emily walked up beside him and put one hand on his forearm, not comfort, but the kind of grip that means stop. He looked at her. She tilted her head toward the corridor. He followed, because whatever else Martin was, he had always respected the particular tone Emily used when she was not asking. In the corridor, under the coat room light, she held up the letter. She did not explain it. Martin read the note standing up, the shadow box tucked under one arm. He read it the way people read things they do not want to be true, fast the first time, then slower, then with one hand rising to the back of his neck. The earlobe pulling stopped. His shoulders, which had been up near his jaw since he walked through the door, dropped 2 full inches. He handed the note back without speaking. Emily watched his face cycle through something complicated, the specific expression of a person realizing they have been fighting over the wrong hill for a very long time. They walked back into the hall together, and Emily did something she had never done at a family gathering in her life. She picked up a butter knife and tapped it against a water glass until the room went quiet. It took 3 taps. The arguing stopped in stages, the way engines wind down. Diane appeared again at the edge of the crowd, bouquet still in hand, mascara slightly smudged from whatever crying had happened in the last 20 minutes. Martin stood 1 step behind Emily, the shadow box on the table in front of him, and said nothing. Emily read the letter aloud in a voice that did not shake. Nora had written that the brooch in any display case was a replica, a copy she had commissioned in 1987, because she had known the family would one day fight over it. The real brooch had been melted down and the garnets reset into 4 small pendants, given quietly the Christmas before she got sick. Then Emily folded the letter, set it on the table, and looked directly at Petra, who had come back inside and stood near the terrace doors with her arms crossed. Emily said, Petra had known since March, 7 months. She had watched this family tear itself apart and said nothing. She asked Petra in front of everyone to explain why. The room turned. Petra's arms dropped to her sides. She opened her mouth, and for the first time that evening, she had nothing ready. Petra said that Nora had asked her to wait. She reached into the pocket of her blazer and produced a second envelope, smaller, sealed, with Petra's name on the front in Nora's handwriting. She had been instructed to open it only after the family had been told the truth about the brooch. She had been waiting for someone to tell them. She crossed the room and set it on the table next to Emily's letter, without meeting Emily's eyes. Martin reached out and placed the shadow box beside both envelopes, and the 3 objects sat together under the candlelight while nobody in the room spoke. Emily picked up Petra's envelope and held it out to her. She said, "Then open it now." It started with one of the older aunts, who said she remembered the Christmas Nora was talking about. The year she had given each of her children a small wrapped box and told them it was nothing special, just a little something. Nobody had connected it to the brooch. They had worn those pendants to graduations and funerals and first days of school for 37 years without knowing what they carried. The stories came slowly at first, then faster, the way water finds its level. Martin sat down. Diane set her bouquet on a chair. The string quartet, uncertain what else to do, began to play something soft. 3 of the 4 pendants were in the room. Emily had not noticed until someone pointed, one at her aunt's throat, one on a chain tucked inside a cousin's collar, one pinned to the lapel of an elderly relative near the back who had worn it so long it had become invisible. The 4th had been buried with Emily's father 7 years ago at his request. 4 small garnets from one brooch, scattered across a family like seeds, and not one of them had known the full story until tonight. Emily crossed to her aunt and touched the pendant at her throat, turning it once in the light, and her aunt covered Emily's hand with her own and held it there. Sometime after 10 o'clock, Emily and Martin ended up side by side at one of the smaller tables near the terrace doors, the shadow box between them like a referee who had already done its job. Martin had gotten himself a glass of water. He turned the shadow box once slowly and said that he had been so certain. He had driven 4 hours certain. Emily did not tell him she understood because she did. She had spent 18 months certain of her own version of things. She picked up the shadow box and looked at the replica brooch through the glass and thought about how convincing a copy had to be to hold a family's attention for a year and a half. Diane found her just before 11, still near the terrace doors, and wrapped both arms around her from behind without saying anything first. Emily stood inside the hug for a moment before she returned it. Diane smelled like hairspray and the white roses from her bouquet, which she had finally set down somewhere. She said against Emily's shoulder that she was sorry the night had gone the way it had. Emily told her the brooch was never in that box to begin with, and they had all shown up anyway. That had to count for something. She went back out to the terrace after midnight, when the catering staff had begun stacking chairs and the last of the family was saying goodbye in the parking lot below. The October cold had deepened. The bird bath still held its film of leaves. She stood at the railing again, in the same spot, palms flat on the same cold stone. Inside, through the glass, she could see Martin helping fold the tablecloths, something she had never seen him do in 40 years of family gatherings. The terrace garden was dark and bare and entirely itself. She took the letter out one more time. She did not read it again. She had it now, all 4 sentences in the order Nora had written them. She ran her thumb along the crease at the top, where the paper had gone soft from being folded and unfolded over 18 months. Then she folded it again along the same lines and put it back in the inner pocket of her coat. Not the desk drawer, not the utility bills. She pressed her hand flat against her chest over the pocket, feeling the slight thickness of the paper beneath the wool, and then she took her hand away. The parking lot of the Hargrove estate was nearly empty by 12:40. She found her car, a gray Civic with a cracked passenger mirror she kept meaning to fix, and sat in the driver's seat without starting the engine. Through the windshield, she could see the lit windows of the hall, where the catering staff moved in silhouette behind the glass. Martin's truck was still parked 2 rows over. She did not know if they would speak differently to each other now, or if the next family gathering would revert to its old shape, the way a bent wire returns to its original curve when the pressure lets off. She started the engine at 12:43 and pulled out of the lot onto the 2-lane county road that would take her back to the I-85 on-ramp toward Charlotte. The estate lights disappeared in her rearview mirror after the first curve. Inside, on the display table near the head table flowers, the shadow box still sat, where Martin had set it down, the replica brooch inside it, garnets dull, silver slightly tarnished, entirely convincing, entirely not what anyone had thought it was. Nobody had taken it. Nobody had claimed it. It sat in the empty hall, under the last burning candles, surrounded by white roses going brown at the edges, holding its shape. Another hour, finally told. This has been Untold Hours.